This podcast is sponsored by Communicate and Connect Counseling, where we have a team of therapists who provide individual, couples, and family therapy services, all tailored to meet the needs of military and veteran families. To learn more about our services, visit www.communicateandconnect.com. Welcome to the Communicate and Connect podcast for military relationships with your host, Elizabeth Polinsky, a military marriage counselor. If this is your first time listening to the Communicate and Connect podcast, please take a second to go rate, review, and subscribe to make sure you get all our future episodes. We also really want to know what it is you love about our podcast, and if for some reason you're not loving it, we want to know that too, because we're committed to providing the best quality content to help you improve your relationships. You're listening to episode 12, Surviving Long Distance and Immigration. Hi, everyone. This is Liz Polinsky with the Communicate and Connect podcast, and I'm really excited because today we have Rachel with us, who is a military spouse, and she has a very unique story, I think, and has been around and through all of the military things for quite a long time. But I don't want to tell her story for her. So, Rachel, why don't you take a second to introduce yourself, and then I'm going to want to hear about the love story.
Okay, absolutely. Well, my name is Rachel. I have been married to my sailor now for 22 years, this past March. We have
Congratulations.
we have 3 children. Our oldest is 24, and he's actually a sailor himself now. And then we have our 20-year-old son and our nearly 18-year-old daughter. So we have been through the trenches, and we're slowly coming out the other side.
Yeah. So I'm gonna want to know about like what those trenches were, but maybe first tell us about the love story, because I love love stories. They make me feel like all nice and gooey inside, and so I like hearing about them.
Absolutely. Yeah, so we met when I was 15. We were both living in Canada at the time. We fell in love pretty quickly. We ended up having our first son just after I turned 17. So it was definitely hard. We had to make some decisions in terms of what our future would look like. And we decided at that time to take a break and see what was going to happen. He went to boot camp and A school. He was an ABE. So he was a flight deck guy for the Navy. He was brand spanking new to the Navy, so I mean, zero money, $0.
Yeah.
We ended up coming back together just before our son was born. We ended up marrying during my senior year of high school, my spring break of senior year. We got married, and he was deployed, I believe it was about a month after he left on his very first deployment. This was 1998, so pre-Skype and email and all that good stuff. We had none of that. We had these little tape recorders, and we would send miniature tapes across the seas.
Oh wow, that's so creative. Yeah.
It was definitely, the only problem was that it was a 6-month deployment. Deployments were pretty routine back then. It was 6 months out. They would come back in like clockwork. Obviously, this was pre 9/11.
Yeah.
Because of the way the mail worked, I mean, we would have fights that would last for months. And, because I would say some offhand comment, and then it was, what did you mean by that? But of course, I didn't get that until like a month later. And so it was hard. It was really, really hard. We definitely struggled. I struggled a lot during that first deployment. I became kind of a recluse. I was afraid to leave home because, what if he called? You live and die by seeing those letters come in, but then, he calls me from Hong Kong and Australia, and I'm dealing with a toddler and loneliness, and he's going on and on about, him and his friends going to this great bar, and, you would see these pictures of him having fun, and while you don't, begrudge him having some levity during such a crap time, when you're 19 with a toddler away from your spouse, all you see is, he loves this, hates me. Like, it was hard.
Yeah.
It was really, really
He's
hard.
living the life while you're a new mom at home and struggling.
Yeah, it was rough, and I didn't have a support system. Nowadays girls and guys have, online communities that they can connect with. I obviously didn't have that. And I was living in Canada at the time, and we didn't really have a reference for this type of military structure. So there was no FRG, no ombudsman, nowhere for me to know what was going to happen. This would obviously rear its ugly head. So we went to the 98 deployment. He came home. It was roses and happiness. But life comes back, right? You have that honeymoon high of, oh my God, he's here, followed by the crash of, okay, well, life is still happening and we still have to, pay bills. And, because he went from his parents' house to the Navy, certain things he didn't understand, like why did groceries cost so much? Or what was this electricity bill for? Like it
Yeah.
was a learning curve for him too. And we were geo-batching at the time. So I was still living in Canada because of immigration costs. I was in BC, Canada. He was in Washington State. So he would come home sometimes on the weekends. And again, it was this constant struggle of, I knew he had a crappy day at work. Like I knew his days on the ship. He was on the Lincoln at the time. And I knew it was hard. I knew that was not a fun life. But when he came home, I would word vomit all over him with how much I missed him and wanted him and all this stuff. So, and he just wanted, he was a punky, I think he was 22 at the time, maybe 23. So, he was still, young dude who wanted to see his friends when he came home,
Yeah.
all this stuff. So it was hard. It was really, really hard. We ended up having what I call the deployment baby. So our second son was born, so many months after that deployment ended. He was born in '99, and it was another adjustment. At the time, my husband was considering transitioning out of the military and going back to school. Obviously, I was filled with fear because at this point, I was high school educated only, and now had two small children and no job. So it was scary. He ended up staying on the Lincoln for 5 years and 1 month exactly.
Okay.
And then he was in the reserves, and he ended up going to school to get his bachelor's. He went to Western Washington. It was during the time of the old GI Bill, so it was a struggle. There was no BAH with the old GI Bill pre 9/11. It only paid for 3 years. He needed 4 years in a chunk, so it was hard. We struggled. It was a white knuckle period. Plus, he still had his reserve duties, so he would go to the base and all this. So it was hard. And even when he graduated, it was rough. It was a really rough period. It was not fun. I will back up though. When we had our second son, he was still in the Navy. He deployed right after our second son was born.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and he was deployed during the Cole, when the USS Cole got bombed. And this kind of led into my passion later on to be involved in FRG, to be involved in the community, because I remember sitting at home in Canada with my two small boys staring at the TV, and all the Canadian news said was there was a U.S. Navy ship in the Gulf, which I knew my husband was, that had been,
Yeah.
and there again, this was 2000, so I didn't even own a computer at the time. I was beside myself. I didn't even know who to call. I had no one. Like that helpless feeling of the love of my life out there, the father of my sons, and I did not know for a solid day if it
Yeah, that's
was
so
a ship.
terrifying. I can't even imagine. Like I live well, it's like 2020 right now, and we have computers, and my husband was just gone. He just got back recently from being out on a boat, and I didn't get to talk to him very often, but it was like at least once a week I got to talk to him on the phone. So I can't, or get emails. I can't even imagine just being at home with no one to contact, and you're just watching this happen on the TV. That sounds like terrifying.
It was absolutely awful. So when he decided to get out of the Navy, it wasn't that I didn't want him safe. It was a financial thing. I was definitely worried that we were going to struggle. He
Hmm.
stayed in reserves throughout his education to get his undergrad, and he ended up working for a civilian company right after. But we were broke. He had a college degree, an engineering degree. He was working for a company associated with Boeing Airlines, and so he was doing like tool design and stuff. Very cool work, but like
Yeah.
we had zero upon $0. So he decided to go back active duty. He actually ended up with the exact same job that he ended up with. So it was kind of crazy. It was like time had stood still, even though all this had happened. He's always been the man who's wanted more. So he always was looking for the next thing. It was I was in awe of him because I was always afraid of like stepping out. And I think in that way we definitely complement each other. Where I'm very much behind the scenes and just want things to be okay, and he wants the next best thing, and he kind of pushes me to be better, and I kind of keep him grounded in what reality is. But he defied the odds and found a program that would allow him to get his master's degree in public health. So
While he was serving, like he did that at the same time.
Yep, it's the medical procurement, I believe. So he was an ABE, so nothing to do with medical at all, right? He's not a fireman. He was an arresting gear guy. So literally like the gear dog, right? Greasy gear dog guy. And he found this program, this very random program that was allowing people to apply to have their master's degree. He ended up getting accepted to the University of Southern Florida. And so in 2013, with our 3 children, we set off for for Florida. That was interesting. We immigrated as a family, so me and the children finally immigrated to the United States in 2006. Very expensive, very complicated process. I have a lot of feelings about the immigration process.
Yeah.
But it was hard, and every hardship that we had to encounter, whether it was, having our next baby or immigrating or job stuff, it has the ability to tear you apart. We would fight. And I mean, just screaming matches. I think we've both threatened divorce several times on both of our sides. And I mean, to the point where I remember being pregnant with our daughter, and I was about 6 weeks away from having her, and we were having the conversation of, yeah, we're both miserable. Let's cut bait. Like we were done. We were young, and when you're young,
and you had a lot of stressors. I would say, like any relationship, when there's more stress in going on in life, when there's more stress in life, it puts stress on the relationship. So you were young, but you also had a lot going on. A lot of couples don't have to deal with immigrating, like military couples. And that's actually a question that I have for you. This is something that I don't know a whole lot about, and I'm thinking there might be other people who don't know about this, but I am wondering about how he was a Canadian working in the U.S. military, and that you weren't allowed to move with him. That is an area that I don't quite understand. So I was hoping you might be able to explain a little bit more about how he was with the U.S. military instead of the Canadian military, or and why you weren't able to move with him.
Yeah, so his mother actually was American. She lived in the States till I believe she was like 10. So she missed the cutoff. So the way the immigration law works is if you have a parent that was in the States, so long as they lived in the States until they were 14 or older, they can apply to sponsor you basically to become a citizen of the country.
Okay.
His mom did not do that, so he had it, but sort of like he had to get very creative. It was a long process from the time that he decided to go into the Navy, and I mean, for him, it was a total lark. I mean, he was, like I said, I think he barely passed high school. I compared our 2 high school transcripts, and it was pretty scary. I had like all these A's despite being a breastfeeding mama in the last 2 years of high school.
Yeah.
He got like a P in English 12, so like they just said, "Oh yeah, fine, just you can go." But so,
he showed them. I mean, he went and he got a master's in public health, which is not an easy task.
Yep, he's definitely, but that's just him, right? He is Mr. If you tell me I can't do it, I'm going to do it twice. So there's no money to be made in the Canadian military at all. I mean, if you are an officer in the military and that's the way that you provide for your family, you can qualify for social assistance. So he knew that wasn't going to be an option for him. And he I mean, he grew up on an 80s child, so, Top Gun and all that stuff, right? So that was just his goal. He found people that were willing to help him, but it took him about 2 years from the time that he decided to do it to the time he actually left for boot camp. It was about a 2-year process. Now, for spouses, It's not as cut and dried. We were lucky. So pre 9/11, it was not happening. In order for me to immigrate, I would have had to apply for a green card. And while applying for a green card, I had to stay put in Canada, right? Could not leave. And it was just at that time really expensive. After 9/11, we were able to do what was called a K-1 visa, basically saying we've already paid the money for the green card and we're going to live in the States while we're waiting for that decision.
Okay.
It was definitely interesting. Steve, in the meantime, while this was all happening, Steve actually became a citizen in 2002. Because post 9/11, the laws changed for him to be able to get his citizenship pre the 10-year mark. Before then, you
Okay.
had to be in the country for 10 years. So he was able to become a citizen. Oddly enough, I was pregnant with our daughter when he became a citizen. So the way it ended up working out is I had to enter the States with a K-1 visa and then get a work permit. And if I wanted to work, the boys had K-1 visas until they could become naturalized. Our daughter was able to obtain a consular birth abroad certificate stating that because her father was a citizen at the time of birth, she was also a citizen.
Oh,
So,
wow.
yeah, it's like this mishmash of
So
like
fascinating.
what.
Yeah, and I just am like in shock maybe because, I think a lot of military spouses, talk about the difficulties of being separated because of deployment, but then you guys are separated not just from deployment, but even when he is at home, so to say, you're separated. You're separated by country lines in a way,
Yeah.
until you guys were able to live in the US with him.
Yep. It wasn't until 2006, 2007, when we immigrated down to San Diego, when he decided to go back into the Navy after school. So we were living in San Diego. Now, bear in mind, I was definitely a homebody, living in a fairly small town in Canada. I had only lived in two places, right? I lived in one town and then the town right next to it, right? I knew
Yeah.
all the same people, and then all of a sudden I'm now driving myself and my children with my husband down to San Diego. And I was terrified. I was that spouse who was like, I'm never leaving the house. I mean, my family was all like, you're going to get shot in a drive-by because apparently
Oh
Canadian,
my gosh.
all of California is like Compton. Um,
Uh-huh.
so it was definitely a learning curve, and I struggled. It was hard, as much as I love my husband, as much as I wanted to be with him full time, to have to immigrate and be in a country that I'm not used to, and things, and yes, Canada and the US are very, very similar. So it's not as though I moved from like Bangladesh and then came to
Yeah.
very, very similar culture wise, but there are differences that I still to this day, after all these years, I still struggle with. Politics is a big one. I don't understand the political system, so it's hard for me. I don't. The medical system is very confusing to me still. Like, I
Yeah.
remember when my husband was working for a civilian job and he came home with his binder. Bear in mind, I had been universal healthcare all my life, and he handed me this Blue Cross binder, and I'm like, "What's a copay?" I
Yeah,
had
very
never heard that
some of those
before.
systems are so different.
It is.
So, if I want to ask a question real fast, like how long were you guys together but separated by that country line before you went to San Diego or California? I don't remember if you said it was San Diego or
Yeah,
San
yeah.
something.
It was San
San
Diego.
Diego.
I would say probably the first 6 years of our marriage we were separated, and then before then it would have been boot camp and stuff. So I would say altogether before I immigrated, probably a good 10 years
Wow.
that we would see
Yeah.
sporadically.
Now that is a long distance relationship if I've ever heard one. 10 years. Oh my God.
Yeah,
Wow.
it was hard, and it's at every stage kind of created a new thing. When we finally got to the place where he was in grad school and getting his master's paid for by the Navy. At that point, obviously living in the country for a couple of years now, I had managed to establish myself working from home. I'm a big proponent on wives becoming educated on the different avenues that they can have a hustle. Not nothing MLM. And I apologize to any of your listeners that do have an MLM.
What do you mean MLM?
Multi-level marketing. So your like pampered chef type style.
Gotcha.
I definitely am a huge advocate of military spouses finding career paths that are like actual careers. And it took me a long time to figure it out, a lot of trial and error, but I ended up working from home. My husband left for deployment in 2007, and I was alone in San Diego. I started getting involved with the FRG for my husband's command, and I really loved it. I loved being able to connect with spouses and to help them. I went to Compass. If anyone is living in an area and they need to connect, gocompass.org is a lifesaver. I don't care how long your husband has been in, go. It's a treasure. I know it's hard during these times and like the dumpster fire that is 2020, but
Yeah.
Compass is an amazing class. It's not based on rank. It's just spouse to spouse mentoring, everything from how to read an LES to local attractions to managing money. It's an amazing organization. But so I ended up figuring out how to work from home, mostly in the technology field. Again, I'm not a computer science person, no degree, still high school only. But I ended up kind of working my way up through the ranks of work from home, and I did everything from Eddie Bauer catalog support to a clinical research company that did one of the clinical trials for Latisse, like the eyelash thing. And now I am the operations manager for a scheduling software company. So it is possible to have a career and love someone in the military, but I think in terms of like love and career, it's you have to adjust your expectations. Are you going to have the life that you thought you were going to have when you were little and planning weddings and what this would all look like? No. It's not the movies. It's not, yes, when they come home from deployment, you hear that music swelling in your ears. You hear like whatever love song it is, whether it's, symphony or Celine Dion in my case, you hear the music.
I'm smiling so big right now. You can't see me, but I'm smiling big because that's like, yeah, it does feel like that, doesn't it? It's just like this euphoric feeling.
But that ends, you have that high of that honeymoon period, and you have to figure it out. And I think that a lot of wives and husbands now too struggle with that expectation. You have to you have to meet somewhere in the middle. You can have a fulfilling life and love someone in the military, but there's going to be a lot of sacrifice on both your sides. He now has to decide on his next duty station, and he's trying to keep it within the lower 48 as much as possible so that I can keep working my job. And so far we've been pretty successful, but it's a struggle. But I will say, this last deployment was our umpteenth deployment, but he got to deploy with his son. So the son that he left behind on his very first deployment was the son that was on the ship with him. They were both stationed on the exact same ship.
That's such a special experience.
Yeah. They got to do port calls together. I got pictures of them in Dubai and Thailand. It was amazing having those two come off the ship at the same time. And I was thinking back to like my very first homecoming with him, and then I had my son, and it was just, I was a ball of emotion, I believe, that whole month. But again, then the reality, right? Now I still have, a son who went through his very first deployment at a young age who, he's a very solid kid, but it's still a struggle, and I think that's the full circle of this military life is that, no matter what age and stage you're at, you're going to have to figure out some stuff. So, my other piece of advice for any military spouse who's just starting out and, is all sorts of, the love song swell, is just know that there are going to be some struggles. My husband and I, we love each other, and he is my best friend, but we struggled. There was a deployment. He came home one year and he couldn't sleep in our bed. He had to sleep on the couch because he was so used to his rack that being in our bed freaked him out. He couldn't handle it. And it was hard. It was hard having a husband who didn't want to sleep in my bed and wanted to sleep on the couch. So
yeah, I'm just imagining like that would hit like I think it would hit my self-esteem in a way. Like, why doesn't my husband want to sleep next to me and want to be with me after he's been gone for such a long time?
Yeah, it was hard. It was definitely, you have these amazing moments. And, and I think too, now that we have Facebook and Pinterest and all these things, it's like, I think girls and guys, spend so much time with that romance, and then they don't understand that after part, like you're going to have to, being the spouse, it's often up to you. And, the military gives us some tools, but not the best tools to be like, here, we broke them. Can you put them back together again so that we can have them back for work? And it's hard, it's a
Yeah.
struggle, but you figure it out and you live to fight another day, I guess.
Yeah, that's so interesting that you said that, because I don't know that I think that that's a spouse's job to put someone back together, you know? Yeah, we could probably go into a long time on that idea, but there is kind of that assumption.
Yeah, I mean, I've often lamented. I'm like, why aren't there more tools? We're sent home these people that we said goodbye to X amount of months ago, and I have friends of mine whose husbands are Marines, right? Boots on the ground, and
Mhm.
so they leave and then come back, and you're struggling because the man that you sent away may not be that same person that you get back, and you have to find a way to love this new person, because while they look and smell the same, they're not always the same. There are parts of them that are changed, and sometimes those parts will come back and sometimes they don't. And it's really, really hard. And I definitely feel for wives who get back spouses who are damaged further than what my husband had experienced with his minor PTSD. It's you you feel so badly for them because the resources, while they're there, are not super readily available. And if they are, there's like a stigma. When our husbands
Yeah.
and wives are in the military, there can be a stigma attached to asking for help and getting more resources for them. And it's hard. It's really, really hard.
Yeah, I can really I'm feeling that when you say it right now. I think most of my work experience was treating PTSD in veterans at the Veterans Affairs Clinic, and I have a guest speaker, so actually it'll be in the lineup of podcasts. It'll be before this episode, but I have a psychologist who's going to end up coming to talk about PTSD and the impact that has on families. And you're right, there is a stigma, especially while you're in the military, about going and getting help after you've experienced something that's been traumatic. But from a mental health standpoint, PTSD is actually a very natural, normal reaction. It's your body doing what it should do in response to a life-threatening event. And I wish more people understood that, because it's not a mental health, we diagnose it as a mental health disorder, but it's not like something's wrong with you the way that maybe people feel like other mental health diagnoses might be. This is just a very natural response to your body going through a life-threatening event.
Wow, that's a very interesting, because I've never heard it described that way. That's a natural thing. I for the first time reached out for mental health help when we were living in 29 Palms, and I had finally kind of, I was hitting 40 and just, all the life changes, and I ended up seeing a health professional who diagnosed me as having extreme PTSD, because I would get very startled easily, even when my husband.
Yeah.
And it felt at the time like not like a death sentence or anything, but you feel like, oh well, I'm just broken, like that. Now I know I'm broken. And I've never heard it described that way. I wish more people would describe it that way.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad I can describe it this way for you too, because yeah, it's really just like a button that's pushed on, maybe. So you're on alert for danger now,
Hmm.
and it's really just like, your body. What I'm getting mixed up on my words, but your body pushes on that button, saying, "Hey, we got to look out for danger," because you've been in a lot of danger and life-threatening experiences, and it just stays on. And the thing is that when people come back or after a life-threatening type of event, that button it didn't unpop out. It stayed popped in, and so they stay on alert looking for the danger, which is the body's natural response. And so a lot of it is helping people realize that they aren't in danger now, and helping the body kind of like let go of that on button.
That's really cool. It definitely. I wish more people like you were talking about that, because it is. when you're a spouse and you hear, like, I have a girlfriend of mine whose husband actually is he works in like the religious services, and he away
Mm-hmm.
boots on the ground and suffers with PTSD. And I know she's felt helpless because you just feel like well, now we know they're broken, and there's just this sense of,
Yeah.
well, now they're broken. And now how do I fix it? And I think, one thing I had to learn along the way, definitely trial and error, is I can't fix him, but I can definitely make it so that when he's home, that I try to not be the one thing that's like hard for him. You know what I mean? Like I've really become cognizant that my words mean a lot to him. When I say things kind of off the cuff or whatever, it's, I've learned that, even though he is a man and he's a manly man, that, some things hurt. And I think to
Yeah.
be very, very cognizant of that. And it's, like I said, I've known this man now for 25 years of my life, and we're still figuring it out. Like, we're still entering new phases and stages, and every time we do, it's like it's almost like renegotiating the marriage contract. We got married super
Absolutely.
young, and we decided a long time ago, like, look, especially that last time that we were on the brink of divorce, and we just made this cognizant decision that, you know if we wanted to do this for the long haul, we were committed to actually staying together. We were going to have to renegotiate what marriage looked like at these different stages, because being in the trenches with little kids is very different than where we're at now with growing children. Our last one is getting ready to graduate high school, our middle son is going to be graduating college, and this will probably be the last house where we have people that we created living with us full time. So
Yeah,
it's that whole renegotiation.
it is. And I'm glad you brought that up. And I think you are like proof. I mean, you guys have been together for so long, proof that relationships can work and that they do require renegotiating what the relationship looks like. I often think, you're really dating multiple people throughout your marriage, because you both are growing individually, and as a couple, and you have new interests. You develop, you may go through different periods of like having a psychological growth period, or go through like a fitness phase, or we all have different phases and ways that we grow. And so you could really be with different types of people. They're all still your spouse, but there are different versions of your spouse as you go along.
Absolutely.
So I like that you talked about renegotiating, and you guys have clearly been pretty successful at that, if you've made it in your marriage this long. Yeah. And so I know, so you were talking about, you guys are kind of in a new phase, and so maybe that was one of the things you and I had talked about before starting, this episode, was kind of switching into the phase of like empty nesters and kids leaving the home. Did you want to talk at all about that?
Yeah, it's definitely been something I've thought about a lot. We, as I mentioned before, we were in the trenches of little kids, and when you have small children, you really don't think that's ever going to end, right? The feedings and the diapers and the tantrums. But now, like, we're lucky at this moment. My oldest son, who's a sailor, is still living with us. We were, because we're all stationed here together. But this will be the last home because of what's happening, with my daughter graduating high school and my son graduating college and my oldest deciding whether or not he's going to stay in the Navy. So this will probably be the last house that we are all living together. And my husband is excited. He is over the moon that it's just going to be the two of us. I have a lot of anxiety about it. I've never been a Betty Crocker type mom. I've never been,
Yeah.
I love my children, but I was never like, my children are precious gifts. I was like, yeah, this jerk lives with me right now. But still, I identify a lot of my day to day as a mom. And when that part goes away, it's just going to be the two of us, and I've definitely, well, I know I love him and he's my best friend, that part of our lives is going to be changed. We will no longer be dealing with, that day-to-day stuff. So, and I really worry about my kids being out of my nest. I often say that I'm the happiest when all my chickadees are in my nest with me. So it's been, I'm worried. I'm
Yeah.
worried that those days are going to be hard.
that I think is so natural to be anxious. I mean, you're rounding a corner, and it's like, I know that this big life change is going to happen and I don't really know what it's going to look like yet.
Mm-hmm.
So not only are you worried maybe for yourself and like the life change you're going to have, but your kids are going through a big life change, and how are they going to adjust to it also?
Yep.
That makes a lot of sense. In a lot of couples, it kind of goes like one of two ways. It's usually never like the middle ground with anything in life. I think, is that when couples kind of end up being empty nesters and they're rounding that corner, like what the research says, it's actually one of the times where couples are the happiest if they can kind of renegotiate their marriage and reconnect again after that. Then it can actually be one of the times where couples are the happiest and they enjoy their lives the most. So that's the bright side, I think, of it. I think the part that is a struggle to get there for some couples is that maybe their life has become so much about the family life and the kids. And that's really natural because, I mean, you have kids, you have to take care of them, So, but what they do in their day and their week and their life becomes, what are we doing for the kids? And their relationship as a couple often gets kind of on the side, put on the side burner as they focus more on the family aspects. And one of the big things that I guess couples have to redo is kind of get to know each other again. There's a researcher called Dr. John Gottman and his wife Julie Gottman. She's also a doctor. They run the Gottman Institute, but they're one of the big researchers in couples related research, and they talk about something called love maps, which is basically the idea that when you're young and you're first falling in love, you're really interested in your partner and you learn about, what was it like for them growing up? What do they dream about for their future? Who do they want to be? What are their desires and interests and hobbies? And as you go along in your marriage or your relationship, you stop learning about each other. You don't update those like mental maps of what your partner is like and who they are. And when couples get to this stage and their lives have been so focused on their kids, and they sometimes find that they don't have much in common. And so part of reconnecting is learning, having that same type of interest and learning what are their fears, what are their hopes for the future, what are their goals and interests, turning to each other for support. I think a lot of people feel this anxiety, but they don't talk to their spouse about it, or they are realizing, oh, I don't have as much in common with my spouse outside of the kids anymore. But it's kind of scary to say that to the person you love, and so they never talk about it.
Right.
And so I guess if I had to say like three things in like a 3-point bullet, it would be tell your partner that you're anxious about it. Not necessarily you specifically, but like people in general, talking about it and acknowledging like, yeah, we've kind of grown apart, or we don't know how to reconnect just us without the kids. And then number 2 would be to start showing an interest in learning about what this person in front of you is like again, almost like you did when you guys first met. And then lastly, it would be trying to bring in time to spend together again, because I guess, what am I thinking? I'm thinking that for a lot of couples, their lives become about the kids. And if they have hobbies, they're hobbies that they do separately with friends. Oftentimes they don't often have hobbies that they've done together. And so that can be a great way to start pulling in. And I guess I have this image in my mind of like rounding a corner, but of starting to come together again, to have these like strands that tie you together in terms of hobbies and activities that you've been doing, creating new experiences for you guys to enjoy together, I think are big ways for couples to navigate that transition.
Well, I like that.
What are you?
That's a good, I like that imagery of rounding the corner.
Yeah, Awesome. Yeah. So those are kind of like my thoughts on that. Do you have any thoughts on that you want to share?
No, I actually I like the idea of just a lot of communication, making sure, and I mean, that's kind of been the thing in our marriage is just, being kind but honest, learning that,
Yeah.
we can be honest about our feelings, just being kind about it. I try not to lash at him for things that are beyond his control. And that's, that was a big learning thing for me when I was younger because, when you're younger, obviously romance looks different and you think that, every fight leads to divorce court, oh, well, we just don't get along and this has got to be over. Obviously now that I'm older and somewhat wiser, I know that
Yeah.
people can fight and it's good and cathartic to get things out so long as it's done constructively. So I think for us, it's just I've learned to not be so closed in with what I'm thinking of. I used to have the internal dialogue like, oh, he doesn't care, or he, maybe I don't want to bother him with this, but I have been voicing that, my anxiety about the empty nest thing, as much as I can with him. And I think he gets it. He tries, I mean, he's Mr. Levity at times where he's like, oh, it'll be fine. He just thinks everything is going to click and go. And that's just, how he is, I guess, with
Yeah.
the military guys. It's like, oh, that's just, insert slot A into B and off you go.
Yeah. My husband's like that too.
It's,
So I
it's
can
hard,
feel it.
and the longer they're in the military, it definitely, that becomes ingrained. Steve's now been military for, over 25 years. So he definitely feels it, in his bones. I don't know if he would ever know how to be a full-time civilian. So, the retirement thing is obviously, he is planning on retiring in the next 10 years. Because now that he's medical, he can stay in. How does he put this now? He says he's going to age out before he ranks out. Medical Service Corps can stay until like 62.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he says 55 is his magic number. So we got about like 9-10 years. But yeah, just being really open and honest with him and just really trying to make it known to him that I'm not afraid of being with him full time. I love him. He's a great guy. I just don't know how that looks for me and for us as a unit, like him on his own, I love him. It's great. But like, how does that look? And I think just making sure that we constantly have those conversations and, acknowledge that it's going to be different, good, bad, or ugly. It's gonna be different. And knowing that different doesn't always mean catastrophic and awful.
Yeah, and I think the thing that you guys have going for you is that you have made it through so many transitions before. So you already know how to go through a transition together. This is just the next one, and it's a one that's a little bit different than what you've done before, but it'll be the same skill set that you guys have used to navigate all the other ones.
Absolutely. I like that.
For those listening, if you were to kind of like maybe give 1 or 2 points of advice, to young spouses or military spouses, or it could be about military or just making it, through 10 years of long distance, or just making it to being together for over 20 years. What would be your top points that you would want to share?
Absolutely. I would say, be flexible. I went to one of those compass classes, and their big thing was semper gumby, right? Be always flexible. And I think that as spouses, we have to do that. Some things are not always going to be the way you imagine them to be, but that doesn't mean it's the worst thing ever. Be flexible, be open. Every duty station that your husband's going to get offered may not be Hawaii, may not be that thing that you were absolutely excited to do, but you can make it work. I lived in 29 Palms, California. That is not a fun place to go, but I met some amazing people there. So just be open-minded, be flexible, and know that, you are definitely not alone. If you are feeling or thinking something, chances are other people are too. And just keep your expectations realistic. I think online groups, while being super supportive, can start setting expectations that there's a right way to do this. And there isn't. There isn't one size fits all. Some people have to geobatch. Some people would rather cut off their arms than geobatch. Some people have children with special needs, and those considerations have to be made. I think, just being kind to each other, us spouses, we have to stick together. Whether it's join an FRG, get to know your ombudsman, don't go into a command thinking that the spouse group is going to be this catty, hen club. Yes, some clubs can be that way, but if you want it to be different, you can make it different. I was a junior sailor's spouse, and I ended up, changing the way an FRG looked for my command, and I was very proud of what I did. And I think that, if there's that famous quote, be the change that you want to see in the world. So, you need to stick your hand up and volunteer. And I promise you that getting involved with the community outside of the online realm will make you feel better. It will give you perspective that you can help others who are maybe feeling the same as you. And having that sense of community will make the next things easier.
Yeah, I just love everything you're saying. I'm sitting here and I'm like nodding my head, and I'm thinking, oh yeah, no one can see me. So but I am in like total agreement. So, well, Rachel, this has been so enjoyable for me. I have just loved hearing about your story, and it's inspiring for me to hear about how you guys have made it through so many different struggles, a large variety of struggles, and are still going strong in your relationship. And thank you so much for being on the podcast and sharing.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This has been a very eye-opening and enjoyable experience.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If so, please take a second to go rate, review, and subscribe so you get all of our future episodes. Make sure to check out the show notes to sign up for our free 10-week relationship email course. This email course is really designed for people who are maybe having trouble with communication or connection in their relationship, and helping them develop some quick wins right away to start improving it. While I am a therapist, this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not considered therapy. And it should also not be a replacement for therapy. If you think you need a professional of any kind, you should definitely go find one. Until next time.